It is just, I think, objectively an amazing thing that they do every year.
And this is all just for the sake of survival. Like, they're chasing that milkweed, they're chasing that high quality forage. And throughout all of that, they've managed to have this migration pattern that has been studied more than just about any other insect alive.
Hey there, Podcast Aquanauts. It's your host, Casey here. Before we start the episode, let's begin with a little visualization exercise. And obviously, feel free to skip this if you have aphantasia. If I say the word butterfly, what do you see in your mind's eye? If it's just a shape, that's okay, but if your mental image is colored up, what does it look like? Is it orange and black maybe, with white stripes? If so, you have probably conjured up something resembling the noble monarch butterfly, the species that is most well known to those of us living in North America. Not only are these beautiful little insects gorgeous to look at, they've got probably one of the most inspiringly daunting natural histories in the insect world. I don't want to spoil the surprise too much before we get rolling, but suffice it to say that the monarch's annual migration is a truly impressive undertaking. That journey also happens to bring these butterfly celebrities through the Tennessee Valley and the Tennessee Aquarium's home in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which lies smack dab in the middle of their eastern migration route. If you've ever wondered where monarchs are headed after they leave your yard, how to encourage them to visit you, and why they're so picky about eating milkweed, this episode has a lot you're going to love. And if this discussion isn't enough to slake your thirst for monarch information, check out an article written by yours truly that appears in print and digitally in the September and October issue of the Tennessee Conservationist, the official magazine of Tennessee State Parks and the much appreciated sponsor of the Podcast Aquatic. But that's enough from me, don't you think? On with the podcast. Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Podcast Aquatic, the official podcast of the Tennessee Aquarium. It's a rainy day here in Chattanooga, and you may hear some noise in the background. We are looking out at AT&T Field, which is right next to the aquarium, and there's some sort of event going on, so you may hear muted music in the background. But I digress. Today we are going to be talking about butterflies, and there's one person at the aquarium who is the obvious choice to talk about butterflies, and that is Rose Segbers. Rose, you have been a frequent guest on the podcast at this point. You are our entomologist too, right?
Senior entomologist now.
Entomologist.
Yeah.
So I like to bring people back when they've had a title change. So Rose, just as a refresher for anyone who's listening who is maybe not familiar with that branch of study, what is an entomologist? What do they study?
Entomologists study insects.
Excellent. Succinct to the point.
Nice and easy.
Oh, and I always forget to do this, but I am Casey Phillips. I am your host of the Podcast Aquatic. I literally have a note on my sheet every time that I sit down to record this. It says, for the love of God, do not forget to introduce yourself, and I forget 98% of the time. But this time I remembered Rose. So what is your background as a lepidopterist?
So I have kind of taken a winding path to get where I am. My original background in school was just a general wildlife science degree. Through that, I got into like stream and field monitoring, and through that, I got into something called stream macroinvertebrates, which are things like dragonflies and damselflies and hellgrammites and all kinds of creepy things that spend the first part of their lives in streams. And they're important indicator species for stream health. So that kind of connects me back to the aquarium. And through there, I started doing field work, started working with pollinators. And through there, I got a job maintaining a butterfly garden. And then after COVID, I came to this butterfly garden.
So yeah, as you mentioned, you do oversee the butterfly garden, a very popular part of the experience that you have when you explore the Ocean Journey building. Very popular with kids, very hot and humid.
Sure.
Probably the most hot and humid place in the aquarium, actually. So it's a nice place to visit if it's especially cold outside, which given when this episode is likely to come out around the start of fall, there may be some days that are starting to feel a little bit crisper and cooler. As we're recording this, spoiler, it's actually the middle of spring. So it's definitely not cold right now, and the butterfly garden is a pretty hot and sweaty place to be.
Sure is.
But anyway, so Rose, you mentioned a lot of different insects that you've had the pleasure. Some people might get squeamish at the thought of working with animals, but you've had the pleasure of working with a lot of different kinds of insects. How do butterflies rank?
I really like butterflies. I'd put them just under roaches as my favorite insect, which I think at this point everybody at the aquarium knows I really like roaches. I just think they're really interesting taxonomically. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on, and they're also termites, which are pretty much just really specialized roaches. Just kind of, they're the only other animal to develop like a social structure the same way like ants do, that isn't descended from wasps. So they did it on their own. Anyway, but I digress.
But butterflies.
I actually really love butterflies too. Unsurprisingly, they're very important species for our ecosystem, and they're also kind of creepy crawlies once you get to know them a little bit better.
It's true. You do have I feel like in your back pocket, you just have a host of horrible facts about butterflies that you like to pull out when you want to make people disabuse them of the notion that butterflies are just the stuff of fairy tales and princesses and fields under rainbows and that sort of thing.
I know how to ruin a butterfly for people, that's for sure.
Well, hopefully we won't do that today, because very specifically we are talking about a butterfly that I think you could argue is if it's not people's favorite butterfly, it is probably the butterfly species with which people are the most familiar, and that would be the monarch. So give us a little bit of an overview of the monarch butterfly in terms of why are they so well known? Because I think I do think, I'm just going to go out on a limb. We were talking about you don't like to speak extemporaneously. You like to be prepared.
Yeah.
I'm speaking more off the cuff here, but I'm just guessing that I would say it's almost inarguable that monarchs are probably people's most well-known butterfly.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I've described them before as the face of insect conservation, and they're very much this iconic species. It's a species you can find in many, many parts of the world, despite the fact that they very likely originated in the Americas, likely South America, Central America. You can find them in New Zealand. You can find them in Hawaii. You can occasionally find them in parts of Europe as well. They're a big butterfly. They're very noticeable. They have that beautiful, iconic orange color, and they just have so many really interesting ecological kind of facts about them. They're a butterfly that people like to learn about in school because you can talk about a lot of stuff. You can talk about viceroys and mimicry as well, which is a butterfly that looks very, very similar to the monarch. You can talk about how that bright orange coloration is meant to signify to predators that they don't taste very good and they'll probably make them sick. You can talk about all kinds of stuff, and I think probably leading into what we're going to talk about today, you can also talk about their very iconic migratory pattern as well, which no butterfly does quite like the monarch.
You're honestly, I fully expect you to do this again in the course of the conversation. You're blowing my mind a little bit that monarchs are found elsewhere than North America, because you think about them. As you said, we're going to talk about the migration, and I think the migration is one of the things about them that makes them really spectacular and a superlative of the insect world. Mm-hmm. I had no idea that they are outside of our continent. I had no idea.
Oh yeah, definitely. They're definitely an iconic species to North America just generally because they do have that migration path and they do kind of signal the change of the seasons in a way that many other insects don't. But there are resident populations in South America, and there are populations that have drifted onto other continents. Like I said, Europe, Oceania. There's you can find monarch butterflies in Hawaii. Famously, they have their own like white morph. About 10% of all monarchs are kind of this bright white color with the same stripes instead of the orange that we normally associate with monarchs. So you can really find them all over the place. They really only do the migration the way they do it here in North America. Most of those other populations are in tropical areas and they're resident populations.
So meaning they don't migrate.
They don't migrate. No. And I could be wrong about this one. But I believe we're not sure whether or not those butterflies were moved by humans or if they just drifted that way on their own, which if any butterfly could do it, it would be a monarch. If any butterfly could cross the Pacific Ocean just through sheer willpower and riding the air currents.
Are they as well known in Europe? Like, do Europeans have the same admiration for monarchs that we have here?
So I don't really think so. I think that that's mostly an American thing. Maybe a transplant or somebody listening from Europe can chime in and correct us at some point.
Gosh, I hope somebody from Europe is listening. That'd be great.
Wouldn't it be? Maybe they'll be able to give us some insight here as soon as this drops. But I believe that a lot of it is mainly the United States. And I think some of that is, once again, we associate monarchs with the change of seasons. They're our big, showy butterfly here in the States.
You said big a couple of times. So
Yeah.
how big are they?
So they're a medium-large size butterfly, but they're big compared to a lot of butterflies that people see. Like, there are a handful of larger swallowtails in North America that also are very big and showy, but monarchs are the only ones really that are that bright orange, aside from like the viceroy, which looks identical to the monarch, with aside from a little band on its hind wing. So when it's a butterfly that turns heads. It's a butterfly that people will notice when it's flying in the sky, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think the fact that they are that bright color makes them somehow appear a little bit bigger, maybe?
I think so, yeah. Because when you hold them in their hand, they're not really that big, but they also do have kind of that lazy flight pattern to them as well. So they show off a lot, I guess is what I'm trying to say. They don't really try to hide the way other butterflies kind of do. They're not trying to avoid predators. They don't really have to.
Yeah, and I guess the whole point of that coloration is that they can kind of shout at predators like, here I am, but you don't want any of this.
You can have a taste, but you're not going to like it.
Okay, so we mentioned earlier that you oversee the butterfly garden, and I know that I have pictures from past years of the butterfly garden that have had monarchs in them. Are they on our normal list of species that we exhibit in that space?
Yep, we definitely have monarchs in that space. You'll find them a lot on the Jatropha. That's this big kind of powder puffy type tree right as you enter in. They're one of the 3 butterflies that like to use that plant, nectar on that plant. Most of ours prefer other species of plant. You'll also find them like sunbathing in the window a lot. They're one of our big sunbathing species. I don't know if it's just because the butterflies we get are imported from Costa Rica, so they're a resident population, but they do seem to be a pretty lazy butterfly all around. You'll find them perching more than you'll find them chasing each other around the exhibit.
All right, now we have talked about the migration in very general, broad terms, but we need to kind of dig into it. So where are these butterflies coming from, and where are they headed to, and about what time of year does this travel happen?
So there are a couple populations of monarchs that people that we're aware of. There are obviously, like I mentioned, other populations. There are monarchs in Central and South America and other continents as well. But the populations that are migratory, we have a Western population and an Eastern population. The Eastern population is the one that we tend to see, or the one that we always see.
We meaning here in the southeast part of Tennessee.
Yes. If you're listening to this from California, you are seeing the Western population of monarchs. But if you're right here in Tennessee. What you'll see is eastern monarchs, which tend to come from central Mexico, and they fly up through Great Lakes region, Canada, for their breeding season, and then they go back down to Mexico every year. They tend to overwinter in Mexico between usually November until their breeding season starts again in March. Like I said, there's also a western population, which their migration is not really just up and down. It's also towards the internal of the country, or towards the interior of the country. They migrate along the coast, sometimes in Arizona, but usually California coast, Baja California, that sort of area. So part of Mexico as well. And as their breeding season continues, and it's a very similar breeding season, late February through early March, they head toward the interior part of the country, like I said, more toward the Rockies, also more up toward Oregon and Washington. So it's really a butterfly you can see anywhere in North America for that reason, that it does have such an expansive migration.
That is, so just the thought of driving, say from here to the Great Lakes, makes me feel tired, and I would just be sitting in a car for 10 hours. How long does this migration take? I mean, when we're talking about an animal who's got a wingspan of, I don't know, 2 inches, and that weighs about as much as a paperclip, how long does it take them to make this journey?
So it depends on whether or not you're talking about coming or going. If they are coming from Mexico, that takes them 3 to 4 generations. They head up from Mexico, and they've spent all winter in Mexico. These butterflies were born in the United States, and they have migrated back down. They will head up back toward the United States, back towards southern tip of Texas, northern tip of Mexico. They will breed and essentially live out the rest of their lives right there. They will not come back up further. It'll be their children that will actually make the rest of that journey up toward their breeding season, and there will be a 3rd generation in there as well. So the monarchs from Mexico are usually the great-great or great-great-great-grandparents of the monarchs that ultimately arrive back down in Mexico the following year.
That is crazy. Okay, so when we say generations, like how long is a generational period for a monarch? Do they mature over the course of weeks, months? I mean, how long does that take?
So I think it's important to kind of reframe how insects are oftentimes different from mammals. When mammals have children and reproduce, they tend to be at the start of their adult life. It's viewed as them having a long period of life ahead of them. They're going to have their whole adulthood. The adulthood part of their existence is the main part of their existence. For most insects and nearly all butterflies and moths, it's kind of the opposite. The main part of your life is as a caterpillar or as a chrysalis, and you only really have 2 or 3 weeks as an adult butterfly or moth. Your job is kind of reproduce and then just disperse and find somebody or find somewhere else to be. So it's a little bit different, and usually they will only live 3 to 6 weeks on the outside after they've reached reproductive maturity. And monarchs are, in most circumstances, no different than that. They'll live about 2 to 3 weeks once they've emerged from their chrysalis as a butterfly, and in that time, they will mate, reproduce, and if they're a northern monarch, fly north toward Canada or in toward the Rocky Mountains.
So once they mature and they are able to continue the journey, how far do they go?
So typically they don't go very far. I mean, they go pretty far, like as a day's trip, but they don't go like the full way from Mexico to Canada. They'll usually go maybe a state or 2 upward, and then they'll reproduce, lay eggs, and their children will take the journey the rest of the way. The monarchs that come back to Mexico the following year are a little bit different from those previous generations. They don't do that. They come out of their chrysalis, they kind of see the state of the Great Lakes regions, and I say this as an Ohioan, I want to make this clear, it can be dreary in that late summer, early fall period. And they see that, they see the shorter days, they see the aging milkweed, and they think maybe this isn't a great place to have kids. So they actually go into something called reproductive diapause, which, yeah, I guess is a technical way of saying kids in this economy. And sorry. And they don't reproduce. They don't reach reproductive maturity, and they make that journey back. And that journey does take them a decent amount of time. They usually start that journey in about August, and they'll head back down, and they'll make it down to Mexico, usually late October, early November, and they will overwinter that way. They will live for about 9 months, which is very, very different from the average breeding season monarch. They typically do not reach reproductive maturity until the following spring, in that March, and they will be the parents of the butterflies that'll continue that journey upward.
That's incredible. So are the ones that are heading down, the ones that make the trip in one generation, are they physically different from their children that make the northern trip?
So, not really. The main reason that they're different is that they are in that reproductive diapause state, which is kind of a pre-reproductive maturity state. So they aren't thinking about finding a mate or laying eggs or anything like that. They don't have the chemical processes in their body that you would associate with mating and reproducing, but that's really the only way that they are different than their children will ultimately be.
I feel like it's worth repeating the fact that these are insects with 2-inch wingspans. Yep. I don't know, maybe larger, maybe smaller. I don't know. They are
about 2 inches, yeah.
Okay, so 2-inch wingspan. They weigh a tiny fraction of an ounce, and they're making this incredible journey.
Yep.
How can they do that? How do they do that? People think of migration and they think of like albatrosses that can just soar on the currents and cover thousands of miles, or whales that can cover thousands of miles. Those are big, albatross maybe not, but the whales those are big animals, and it makes sense that a 60-foot whale can travel 8,000 miles. Somehow that seems less impressive than a butterfly that's got a 2-inch wingspan covering, I don't know, right. What is that, 1,500 miles, 2,000 miles, something like that?
Yeah.
How do they do it?
So they handle it by conserving energy. They eat whenever they possibly can, which is why it's so important to provide them with nectar sources as they fly down. They also take a lot of breaks. They roost in trees, that sort of thing. So they get a chance to relax as well. They get a chance to build up their fat stores, their lipid reserves, and that's really the big difference. And also they do use the wind currents in order to kind of push them along. It's not necessarily all powered flight. They don't really fly, I guess, purposefully is the best way to describe it. They just kind of drift toward where they need to be, and they take a long time, and not most of them make it, but somehow a decent percent of them make it, and quite a few of them don't. Like, obviously not every butterfly that is born up in the Great Lakes region is going to make it all the way down, but a decent amount of them do make it, and it's really just by conserving their energy, eating a lot of food, taking a lot of breaks. It is very much marathon, not a sprint for them.
Do we have any idea how they navigate?
So I don't think there's any hard and fast evidence on this, but I do know that there's a lot of research going into it. There's some evidence that they use the sun, which is what most insects use in order to navigate. There's also some evidence that they may use the magnetic poles of the Earth to navigate as well. There's been theories tossed around that birds use that as a backup when there's cloud cover. There's also a solid possibility, and this is what they kind of think for northern migration, that they're chasing high quality forage as well. So they're going to naturally go in the direction that they find the best milkweed or the best ironweed, which is another popular nectar plant for them. They're gonna look for those healthy plants when they head back down toward Mexico.
So the natural segue, I guess, from what you just mentioned is to talk about that association that butterflies and I guess in this particular case, the monarch has with a host plant.
Yes.
So you mentioned milkweed a couple of times. Talk about the relationship between the monarch butterfly and the milkweed and why that's so important to both.
So this is the case for most butterflies. I do want to clarify. Most butterflies have very, very specific plants that they have to lay their eggs on. Their larvae have to eat oftentimes when their caterpillars hatch. If they're on a different plant, they won't eat that plant. They would rather starve than eat anything but milkweeds. And
every parent understands a kid who's a picky eater. I have 3 of them in my own house.
This is an entire species of picky eaters. Well, really moths are a little less picky. So really several families of picky eaters, we'll say that. Butterflies have very, very close associations with that plant. Most butterflies will not lay their eggs unless a milkweed is present and they can oviposit on that milkweed, kind of like you wouldn't go to a restaurant that doesn't have your kid's favorite food sort of thing. And this helps out their caterpillars as well as their adults as well when their caterpillars ultimately become adults, because milkweed does not taste very good and it tends to make birds throw up. So what will happen is a bird might try an adult monarch butterfly once, but it tends to be not a mistake they make a second time, because it's not enough to kill them, but it is enough to give them an extremely bad time. And that's also why they have that bright warning coloration as well. That kind of lets any birds know, as we previously discussed, hey, I'm here. I still have the milkweed chemicals in my body that make me taste terrible and basically make you throw up as well. So they get a protection from that.
So they're benefiting from the milkweed in that the milkweed provides a defense for them.
Yes, they keep that taste of milkweed in their body for the entire rest of their lives.
So in that sense, it's kind of like in a previous episode of the podcast, we talked with one of our herpetologists, Charlie, about it was our frog episode talking about poison dart frogs. And so poison dart frogs, the toxicity that they've got is a byproduct of the food they eat. So the insects that they eat makes them not taste terrible. They are actually toxic. So it's interesting. The nature is interesting.
Right.
I mean, I hope everybody who's listening to this show agrees with me, but it's conversations like this, I think, just emphasize how many interesting strategies there are that allow the diversity of life on this planet to survive and thrive. The Tennessee Aquarium's podcast Aquatic is made possible by support from the Tennessee Conservationist, the official magazine of Tennessee state parks. Each issue is filled with fascinating stories about Tennessee's native species, rich history, and unique culture. It's also your guide to exploring state parks and planning your next outdoor adventure. Subscribe today at tnconservationist.org. My mind is just being blown, as I mentioned, consistently in the course of this conversation. But you were talking about milkweed, so continue.
Yes. I think I pretty much got back around to the thesis of my point. The reason why milkweed benefits monarch butterflies so thoroughly is because they continue to taste like milkweed and they continue to have the benefit of the toxins in their body for the rest of their life, because even as adults, they still continue, like I said, to taste like milkweed. They continue to be a little bit poisonous to birds, which is extremely useful to them because birds don't really bother them. And when they do, they don't do it a second time.
Are birds like the main predator of butterflies in general, but monarchs in particular?
Yes, birds are the primary predators of butterflies. Other flying insects will take monarchs from time to time, but the main predator is definitely birds.
Okay, so not only are they making this incredible journey that just the sheer physical exertion seems like it should kill a lot of them off, they're also doing it across a vast expanse where they're, again, being attacked probably by a lot of different kinds of other wildlife, not to mention having to weather, so dealing with storms and that sort of thing. I don't know if you are so jaded from having worked with insects as long as you have, but the resiliency of all insects, but these insects in particular, it's just mind blowing.
Right. Butterflies are a lot cooler than people give them credit for.
I do think that I think of them in terms of associating them. I mentioned fairy tales, and I said that very tongue in cheek, but I do. I think people think of them as these delicate, fluttering things, and yet for all their fragility, and if you've been to our butterfly garden, if you've been fortunate enough to have one of them land on you, one of the butterflies land on you, you will notice that they are very delicate. They do weigh basically nothing, but still their natural history involves this incredible journey that just, I'm gushing. But I don't know how else to talk about this, because it is just, I think, objectively an amazing thing that they do every year.
Yeah, like that's pretty much it. And this is all just for the sake of survival. Like they're chasing that milkweed, they're chasing that high quality forage. And throughout all of that, they've managed to have this migration pattern that has been studied more than just about any other insect alive.
Incredible. Let's take a music break. Okay, Rose, so are monarchs the only species that undertakes, or insect species that undertakes this kind of journey? Are they outliers in the insect world, or are there other insects that also migrate vast distances like this?
So there are other insects that migrate like this. I feel like the most famous version of this, and it's not really a migration as so much as it is just a massive displacement, are locusts. When certain species of grasshopper become too crowded against one another, they actually, this is obviously not something I'm as well versed in as other species of insects, but what happens is once they become too crowded together, they undergo a chemical change in their body, and they become what most people associate with like swarming locusts. And they just disperse, and they eat as much as possible, and economic and societal damage has been caused as a consequence of that. But that still isn't really a migration. They don't come back. It's just kind of a massive disbursement, but most people are aware of it, so I thought it was worth it to point out.
Sure, that's a good point.
So otherwise, there are several species of butterfly that do kind of have habitat changes throughout the rest of their lives. Most famously, I feel like, is the painted lady, which I could be wrong, but I think that is the most widely distributed butterfly in the world. I think there are painted ladies on every continent but Antarctica.
Wow.
So they're very, very widely distributed. And they do have a migration pattern as well. What it's called is impulsive migration. It doesn't really track with the seasons or anything like that. Just when they need to disperse, they do. And they do tend to come back to original breeding grounds just because a lot of things come back to original breeding grounds, because you know that the food's good there, you know that it's a good habitat, it's a good place to raise kids. It's a little bit like moving back to your hometown to have kids, which people do all the time. But it's not really the same as monarchs because monarchs do have that pattern. They do have that seasonality. They have something you can really track and predict.
It's predictable, yeah.
Yeah, you can't really do that with, say, I think the clouded sulfur is also somewhat migratory and also local to us, as well as the painted lady and red admiral. They just kind of do it as the need strikes them.
Okay, so it's like an environmental trigger.
Yes, it's about environmental conditions, and they don't have that consistency to themselves.
Okay. I fed you questions before we started this conversation, and now I'm throwing you a curveball because it occurs to me that I didn't really think to bring up the fact that monarchs have they're kind of in trouble. Mm-hmm. So can we talk a little bit about why a couple of years ago there was a big to-do about the fact that the monarch was listed as an endangered species, and why was that happening, and what was the response to that in the lepidopterist community, but maybe in the broader community, if you can kind of discuss that.
Yeah, absolutely. So monarchs obviously are in decline, and they have been in decline pretty much as long as we've been measuring their populations. Some of that is definitely habitat loss down in Mexico, over in California and Arizona. Some of that is also driven by pesticide use and herbicide use, kind of removing milkweed. Milkweed is called milkweed for a reason. It is a weed. It does kind of grow impulsively, and some people do not like it in their well-manicured garden. So that's part of what is driving this. That being said, in the eastern monarch population specifically, what we're doing appears to be working because that population was up in Mexico over last year. That being said, the western migration or the western monarchs population is still down, and both populations are still down significantly versus where they were a decade ago or 20 years ago. I think this is once again, this is why I like to have my numbers in order. I want to say it's something like 1/4 to 10% of what they were in the 90s.
Gosh,
so.
that was almost good news, Rose. You almost gave us good news about a species for once.
But I am giving you good news. They are on the upswing, and it does show that what we're doing is having an impact. And that's really the best news we can possibly get, because that means there's no worry that there's nothing we can do to stop this. It turns out that listing the monarchs in the ESA,
so Endangered Species Act.
Yeah, listing the monarchs, having public hearings, having all these forums on what we're going to do about the population, encouraging groups to plant milkweed. There's been this massive push for pollinator-friendly roadways among departments of transportation, which TDOT has been a part of.
I say, including the Tennessee Department of Transportation.
And this has definitely made a dent in these populations. So I'd argue that that is fundamentally good news, because that means that we have somewhere we can go from here.
Okay, so let's take the circumstances that are affecting the monarch population that led to them becoming endangered. Substitute in a different, lesser-known species, a different kind of butterfly. Do you think there would have been the kind of turnout and response to, say, the painted lady or the crimson sulfur? Whatever you said earlier, I'm sorry, I can't remember.
Cloudless sulfur.
Cloudless sulfur. If it had been another butterfly species, do you think there would have been the kind of public response that impelled people to make a change? Do you think that or is the fact that they are such a celebrity species of the insect world, did that play a role in the motivation of the public to act to try and save them?
So I think that certainly helped that they are such a famous butterfly, but the nice part about the fact that they are such a famous butterfly is that pretty much everything you can do to conserve monarchs, planting native species, avoiding using herbicides and pesticides, are things that are going to have positive impacts on other butterflies as well. It's very, very difficult to just conserve the monarch. So really, it's good news all around. And I can tell you that there is a species of hair streak in Florida that was fully extirpated from Florida for a long, long time.
Meaning that it had disappeared completely from that one location.
Yes. It was likely completely gone from Florida. It's called the Atala hair streak, and native species gardening kind of picked up in Florida over the past 50 or so years, and that species has now been reestablished. So there is a possibility that anything we can do to plant native is going to have a knockdown effect on the entire ecosystem if we can do it.
I do like the taste of good news. It's such a rare dish these days.
Right.
All right. So you mentioned a couple of things. Why should people want to help the monarch? Why is it important for homeowners to beyond just this isn't a species of butterfly that they happen to be familiar with? Why should they want to protect butterflies, but specifically the monarch?
So if we talk about just like a purely selfish, self-interested position, 1 in 3 bites of food we eat are pollinated by pollinators, including the monarch. So there are not just like ecological consequences for us not conserving our native pollinators. There are also economic consequences for not conserving our native pollinators, and culinary consequences for not conserving them as well. Like you might not have that species of squash you like so much.
I don't like squash, but continue.
Well, I like squash, so...
Fair enough.
I might not have that species of squash I like so much. So that's really the big thing. Pollinators are an important part of our ecosystem just generally, but like I said, they're also an important part of our economy, our food economy as well. So you will miss the pollinators once they go.
This episode will hopefully go live around the time when we can expect to see monarchs appearing in our area, which is at what time of year?
So if we're just talking about Tennessee, it does tend to really depend. There are technically monarchs in the area right now. They're heading toward their spring and summer breeding range, but you might not see them because they tend not to land as frequently as they will in the fall. But in the fall, we'll start seeing the big numbers that we kind of expect to see from monarch migration, because that's when they're slow and they take a lot of breaks. So you will be seeing them at their highest number probably between August and October. So right when this is set to air.
Okay. So what kind of numbers are we talking about? Because we've people think of migrations and you think of larger mammals like wildebeests. I think the wildebeest migration is about 1.5 million animals or individuals moving across the Serengeti. When we talk about the migration of the monarchs, how many individuals are we talking about? Do scientists even know how many we're talking about?
It is notoriously difficult to estimate monarch abundance. Normally, the way that we do it is we have previous numbers that we kind of got from monarch counts that we've extrapolated out to like areas. So what we do is we measure the amount of area that monarchs are roosting in over the winter down in Mexico. And the previous count, I believe, was 1.79 hectares of monarchs living, which is, I don't know, about 3.5 acres. And they are expected or estimated to have about 20 to 30 million monarchs per hectare. So it's a decent number. Yeah.
So dozens of millions of individuals.
And it's hard to believe this used to be an even bigger number. Like if you talk to people who were around in the 60s, 70s, and even the 50s, they'll tell you stories about just these fields that were covered in monarchs, and people don't really see that anymore.
So one of the most surreal things that you can see, but also that you can hear, is a scene that's, I think it's in the IMAX film that has appeared a couple of times at our IMAX 3D theater, Flight of the Butterflies 3D. There's a scene down in Mexico, up in the mountains of central Mexico, where they are spending, I guess, their winter, and they are covering literally every surface of an entire forest. And what's especially cool about it isn't just the number of them that you can see moving and covering the outside of these trees, but the sound they make.
Oh yeah,
The sound of millions of whisper quiet wings brushing against each other. Somehow, with that many of them, it suddenly becomes this almost indescribable sound.
Yeah.
And I will try and remember to link in the show notes the trailer for that film, if it includes that particular scene, because it is a really powerful scene that visually and audibly illustrates what you're talking about, the numbers you're talking about. So as they're coming through the migration path, the eastern migration path, as they come into Chattanooga and other parts of the southeast Tennessee, are we talking about in your yard you might see 2 or 3 a day? I mean, hundreds a day, 1,000 a week? Like what numbers can people expect to see in their yard? If it's just like 1 or 2, well, that might not communicate to them that there's a migration happening.
So it really does depend on what your yard looks like. You may only see 1 or 2 a week if you do have like a perfectly manicured yard and you might have like a hosta or something planted. But if you have a lot of native species, a lot of ironweed, a lot of goldenrod, a lot of native asters, that sort of thing, you will see a decent amount of monarchs. And even still, if you plant milkweed in your yard, you will see large amounts of monarch caterpillars as well, because they will come through and lay their eggs.
So you mentioned a couple of species that aren't milkweed. So even though monarchs are very particular about where they lay their eggs, are they as particular about what they eat?
So as adults, they don't really have the same dedication to nectar plants that they do to host plants. They do have a little bit of preference, though. They do like something nice and stable that they can land on, which is why I always recommend that you plant native asters. They also do like milkweeds for a nectar plant. If you plant butterfly weed in your yard, and I'm a big butterfly weed advocate here. If you plant butterfly weed in your yard, you will see monarchs both visiting it for nectar as well as laying their eggs on it. And you'll see several other species of butterfly as well. That's really the big one, is that they are looking for something stable and they are looking for something familiar. Most of these butterflies have been closely associated with these plants for thousands and thousands of years. Monarchs are less likely to visit another species that might be from another country or continent than they would be to visit something that is native and that they can recognize as food.
Okay. And when you say stable, do you mean like the structural stability of the plant, so something that can support their weight?
Yes. I mean, like I said, something that has like a nice landing pad for them is kind of what they want. They want something that they can sit on. Like I said, monarchs are really at their laziest when they're on that fall migration, because that fall migration in itself is such a heavy undertaking that they want to take a break. They want to have a sit. So they might actually just sit down on plants. So
Gotta love a rest stop.
Right, exactly. I always recommend that plant something native and plant something sturdy.
If anybody listening to this wants to do their part to help monarchs, are there resources available online that can walk them through some steps they can take if they don't want to have to rewind this episode and listen to that part again? Are there web resources?
Absolutely. If you just search up specifically any Tennessee Extension website should have it, but if you want something more broad, the Xerces Society, which is always a really good resource, has a planting for pollinators guide specific to the Southeast on their website, which does give a list of native species that you can plant and instructions on how to plant them.
In the meantime, if you want to visit the aquarium and actually see a garden without having to go through all the effort of planting one yourself, our Pollinator Pathways, a self-guided tour that exists on our plaza and has a series of gardens that are planted, I think, almost exclusively or maybe exclusively with native plants. So if you come at the right time of year, you will see monarchs on those plants, on the milkweeds that she has planted. You maybe even be lucky and see some of their very cool looking caterpillars. They've got they're black and white striped, right?
Yes. Yeah. They're kind of a black yellow kind of caterpillar, and they've got some antennas. They're really interesting looking.
Very, very cool to look at. And then their chrysalis is a very kind of pale green, right? Are there gold accents to the?
There are. There's a little like gold zipper type thing on that.
They're beautiful basically at every stage of their life. Rose, I think that we can go ahead and wrap up this discussion about monarchs, in particular, the absolutely incredible, gobsmackingly astounding voyage that they undertake. Truly one of nature's great migrations, one that I think is it's celebrated for sure, but I don't know that people really, until they stop and think about just the size of the animal that's undertaking this voyage, really appreciate exactly how stupendous it is. So thanks for taking us along the path of that migration and telling us a little bit more about what makes these butterflies so special.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I always like being on here.
If you have an idea for a future episode of the podcast Aquatic, or a question maybe for someone like Rose or one of our other experts, send it to us at podcast@tnaqua.org. And while you're online, make sure you leave us a rating or a review. All of those are free ways to help us out with the algorithm and make sure that more people see the show and hopefully listen to it. And in the meantime, until next time, remember that every drop matters.